everyone. Thanks for sticking it out here with us. My name is Grace Kyne. I've been with EY's sales and use tax practice for almost 10 years now. I work with clients in all different industries, but I've spent the better part of the last several years talking to companies about how blockchain technology and Web3 is going to impact their tax and finance function. Do you want to give a quick intro, Florian?
Yeah, also warm welcome from my side, even though the crowd is pretty empty, but still happy to be here. My name is Florian. The last name is pretty complicated, so just stick with Florian. I'm also with EY, but from our German branch. I've been with EY for the last 8 years. If you want to stick into the Web3 terminology, I do VAT and starting with Web3, what we do here. I also do a lot of Web2, so other platforms without naming them, like short-term accommodation, or right services or whatnot. I think you know what the Web2 part is. I also do a lot of e-commerce, so going down the ladder to Web1. And if you want to call it that way, Web 0 basically, which I would call like customs and excise duties, so real tangible goods, so not real the techie NFT stuff. But yeah, so going up and down the ladder, that's what I basically do from a VAT perspective.
Florian makes fun of me because I don't even have a Twitter handle. I am the first to admit I am not a native to this space. I initially got involved because some of my favorite clients were exploring what NFTs could do for them and thinking about standing up their own platform. And they came to me with questions that at the time I couldn't answer. And so I went out and educated myself, and over the course of that education, I got to engage with this incredible community, a few of which remain in the room here with us today. So I've been doing tax for a really long time, it feels like, but I originally started out in fine arts. So to be able to stumble on this trove of creatives that are using this technology to really revolutionize the way that we create and consume and interact with art has been a real bright spot in my career. So I'm so excited to be with you today. On the sales tax side, very exciting end of the day topic. On the sales tax side, there are 3 pieces that have to be in place in order for a state to require an NFT marketplace to collect sales tax. You've got to have nexus in the state. What you're selling has to be subject to tax, which is not such an easy answer, and you have to be the retailer associated with the sale. Do you ask the same questions on the VAT side, Florian?
Yeah, so I'm going to be here to speak a little bit more on the EU perspective, and we mainly ask the same questions. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the first 2 questions. I think the first question, yeah, we kind of ask it, also kind of not ask it. I would rephrase it as the jurisdictional question. So do you have jurisdiction over a seller or a marketplace? So can you actually tax him on like constitutional basis or whatever? So like if you think of yourself as being the government, you would, in wishful thinking, obviously you want to tax everything, everyone. But if someone is a resident apart, not really abroad, sitting somewhere else, yeah, it might just be wishful thinking to be able to tax that person. But with my basic, I would say, or slightly below average knowledge of the US taxes, I see why you asked this question, because you somehow should have some nexus that you really have on a fairness issue grounds to tax this person. And also I think this jurisdictional question is really connected to the enforcement question, because it's not just about are you allowed to tax someone? So if it really, it's also about, can you tax this person? Can you enforce it? And this is more like what we ask in Europe. We also have big fraud issues, because we're not really asking the jurisdictional question. We just, with some, I don't know where we get that confidence, but we just say, well, if you do business here, above a really tiny threshold, yeah, you should be remitting our VAT. Even though we might not chase them at home, and this is also where the fraud issue comes up. It's kind of logical to me, but from that perspective, yeah, partly we're asking that question, partly not. On the second question is also where I kind of have to elaborate a little bit more. So like, is it a taxable sale? I don't want to talk too much on what you will say about that, but on asking the easy question, is selling NFTs taxable? For us, that's pretty easy. It is. In our world works the way that we have either a supply of a good or a supply of a service, but everything is taxable. The situation where you have stuff exempt, and to keep it really short, is not NFTs. You might get a reduced rate or so, but if you sell something in the EU, I'm not necessarily saying that a tax occurs, but you're already in the tax law and you have to apply the provisions. If a tax, if really a tax remittance obligation comes out of that, is a different question. So you have to apply our laws, but then you also have to check what is the character of the transaction. What are you actually selling? Is it a service? It might also be a supply of a good, even though it's on the computer, and you guys all know NFTs.
I'm sorry, Florian. Yeah. Mike, your phone is up here.
Is it yours, or is it of the lady before? I don't know. But here's a phone. Blue Orange. Yeah, it's yours.
Sorry, Florian.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to get too far. That's a
Not
great
mine,
question.
but you figured that out. Thank you
very
Sure.
much.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so you have to find out the character of what you're actually selling. Might be an electronically supplied service, might be a normal service, and then different rules of place of supply rules apply, and then you can end up having the transaction actually taxable in the EU, and then you have to remit the tax in Germany, in Poland, wherever that is. Or you can end up like qualifying what you are actually selling, the NFT you're actually selling as, like, for example, as a normal service, where we basically, if it's in a B2C transaction, apply basically the resident rules. So if we would do that from the US, then it would be like our law would say, well, the place of taxation is in wherever Delaware, so deal with your Delaware law, but we apply our law, but we don't end up with tax payments. So that would be my short take on the first two questions. But how about you?
Yeah, they're really important questions on the sales tax side. The jurisdictional piece is protected by the U.S. Constitution, and there's some variety of exciting case law that goes along with that. But essentially, if you've got a physical presence to an employee or a location in the state, that state has jurisdiction to require you to comply with their sales tax rules. And the taxability piece is also a really cool one. We've seen some really interesting client fact patterns, and listening to Elena and Masha kind of talk through those, I got my wheels spinning. But in the US, we've got 46 states that impose a state-level sales tax. And to add a layer of complexity, a lot of those states authorize localities to impose their own taxes and rates and definitions as well. And they all tax different things. So we've only gotten guidance from 5 US jurisdictions at this point, with various levels of helpfulness, I'd say. Puerto Rico and Pennsylvania just shoved the acronym NFT at the end of a list of taxable items. And I loved what Paul was saying about using that acronym, because it doesn't really mean anything. The NFT isn't the thing, right? It's just the technology. And so that level of guidance out of states has left a lot of my clients in kind of a difficult position, especially with states like Pennsylvania, who have said, this is the way our law has always been, and we're going to chase historical sales of NFTs going back to whenever we feel like it. And so those rules are creating a lot of risk under audit. We also have Minnesota, Wisconsin, and probably most thoughtfully Washington, who have given us some guidance and said that we're going to go and we're going to look through the transaction to what the NFT is associated with, the underlying asset. So whether that's art or music or videos or collectibles, we're going to look at that underlying asset. Because we know, of course, that an NFT might be associated with a real property deed or a financial instrument, none of which would be traditionally subject to sales tax. Digital art, though, would potentially fall into about 2/3 of states' definitions of digital goods and subject to tax. If that NFT is associated with admissions or entertainment, also subject to tax in a pretty significant number of states. So really important to understand, and when you're building a platform and gathering data points on what transactions are flowing over that platform, really understanding what sort of assets you're selling and the components of that asset. So if you're selling a digital good and there's some element of tangible personal property, something in real life, that has the potential to totally change the characterization of the transaction. And we typically see that in 3 different scenarios. I see tangible personal property that is authenticated with an NFT, doesn't really change much. I see NFTs that are a lot in the art space, actually, that are delivered on tangible personal property, like an iPad for display purposes. That can make an entire, $3 million piece of art subject to tax as tangible personal property. And then the third piece we see a lot with my bigger traditional retailers is where you get a toy and you get an NFT. And so deciding what the appropriate tax base in those situations is really important. And then that third piece, so we talked about nexus, taxability. The third piece is who's the retailer, and that's really where things start to get really sticky, I know, especially from a VAT perspective, because we start to think about marketplaces.
Yeah, definitely, and we also we have to touch on that point because that's the name-giving point of our panel. So marketplaces, we just now also mostly spoke on issuing just NFTs and stuff, but marketplaces, why should they worry? Why should they ask, why should they consider also VAT or sales and use tax issues? It's like their main idea would be of a marketplace. If you go like for a second away from the tax questions, what does a marketplace do? You could, I think, phrase it differently, but you could also call it like a business light. They're not really actually conducting a whole lot of business. They're not manufacturing stuff. They don't have, they might have some intellectual property or so, but the point I'm trying to make is that they're more facilitating others to do business. They're trying to bring A and B together. And I think what they did for the better part of the last 20 years is, if you really think of a non-digital marketplace, like real physical premises where there's a farmer selling potatoes and I own the land, I just let him do his business, let him deal with all the issues, tax issues, consumer protection issues, and whatever issues can come up, and I just collect a fee and that's it. And the same thing is happening in the VAT or in the market in the NFT world. But yeah, and what happens when problems occur? Like if my potato is rotten, I could actually go to the seller, but maybe he's not there anymore. So I could go actually to the landowner, who basically is also pretty visible. We all know the big marketplaces in the Web2 world, and ask him. And for too long he said, "Sorry, I can't tell you anything. You have to go to the vendor, ask him." But if he's gone, yeah, then we have a problem for like. Stick to the example of intellectual property laws or so. But if you put that now into the tax context, it's going to be the tax office asking for money. And if the seller somehow is gone, yeah, they're going to ask to the marketplace for taxes. And now, especially in the EU we have rules where like this wishful thinking of the marketplace, where they say, well, we actually don't do business, we're just letting A and B do stuff, we're not responsible for anything, where they put a stop to this. So they somehow drag, not somehow, by provisions, on statutes, they drag the marketplaces into the transactions of the seller and the vendor. And that's what the marketplaces then want to do, but the laws are a depiction of reality, and also somehow there every other law the legislator work with fictions. So they put in fictions that marketplaces can say, well, I don't know what he sold. They are responsible. They get drawn into the transaction, to the supply chain, even though it's not happening in the real world, but from a law perspective, they are in the transaction. And that is one point for VAT, and another point would be like reporting obligations. So they have to report to the financial authorities what was actually sold on their marketplaces. So we have a third-party controlling mechanism if I forget to report what I did on the marketplaces, and if I sold NFTs there and made a good money of it. How is it in the US? Do you also have these issues for marketplaces?
We absolutely do. Every state has now imposed a marketplace facilitator rule, and the definitions are all a little bit different state to state, but essentially if you host a platform that brings a buyer and a seller together and you directly or indirectly process the associated payment, most states are going to say that you're the marketplace facilitator and you have a tax obligation. And the reason I think sales tax is the most important tax type to be focusing on right now if you have a platform. I know tax tends to be really low on the list for everybody, but you think about a traditional retailer that might be selling a $100 widget. If they fail to collect the $7 that they owed on that and they get caught under audit, that $7 is going to come out of their profit margin. If an NFT marketplace sells a $100 NFT and fails to collect any sales tax on the primary sale and all of the many secondary sales that we often see, and they only collect $2 in commission, you can see how the tax associated with all of those transactions very quickly dwarfs the revenue of the company itself. So I know that we're a little squeezed for time, so I'll wrap it up. But pay attention to sales tax, think about your systems and processes, leverage the KYC requirements that you already have to comply with to scrape the blockchain. There are ways to comply here, and if you can think about it proactively, you'll be in a lot better shape.
Don't let the tax man come for you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're still with us, you guys are rock stars. That wraps the end for today. Go, eat, drink, be merry, and we'll see you guys again here tomorrow. Thank you.